Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Yes, great. I have to say a few things first. David Cordani we're competitors at Signum. And one night I was having dinner with David at an industry event, and we started talking about our history. And he says, "Oh, you're from Houston," because that's where I moved prior when I joined Humana about 5 years ago. And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Where'd you go to high school?" Because I lived in Houston. And I said, "Klein High School." And he says, "You got to be kidding me. I went to Klein High School." And then we started talking, and he indicated where he worked, part-time. It's where I worked. I mean, he is like a brother to me, and because he came here, and he graduated from here. So David and I sort of have a similar background, and it's sort of coincidental that we're in the same industry. What I'd like to do today is maybe, I've asked around what would be helpful for you, because I want this to be helpful and not a speech. I want it to be helpful. So I'm going to give a few opening comments, but then I'm going to turn it around and ask you guys for questions, because I find the dialogue is much more effective than a speech itself. But what was asked of me is maybe to give a little bit of history about me and more about what were those things that determined your fate. What were the things that helped you sort of evolve? What did you learn, and what would you do different over the coming, if you had to do it over? And I'm going to try to narrow those into a few things that maybe you guys could digest and use as you progress in your career. First, I want to start off with how did I get to A&M? How did I make the decision to come here? And it's really going to highlight that life is not predictable. If you want to have sort of just design your life over the next 50, 60, 70, 80 years, it's not designable. It's just not designable. Because there's going to be times that it's going to be very unpredictable, and that's what makes life, so great. It's the imperfections of life that makes life fun. It's not, if life is a perfection, it wouldn't be fun. Sometimes it's challenging, and I'll give you some stories of those times that were challenging and say why did I make that decision? But how I got to A&M is I was actually, and I know I'm going to get booed here, I was actually going to University of Texas. Thank you. And I was going to go to University of Texas, and I went to the orientation that summer. And after the orientation, well, during the orientation, I should say, I had a lot of fun. My roommate was a best friend in high school, and we stayed out late. I had a girlfriend there, and it was just a fun 3 days. But when I was driving back, I asked the question to myself. I said, "What do you want, Bruce? Do you want to have a party, or do you want an education?" And I concluded at that time that I wanted an education. I wanted a great job. I wanted to make an impact in life. And if I would have stayed there, I would have had too many influences. Girlfriend, a very good friend that would love to party, Austin, Texas. And in addition, the values of University of Texas, which is a great school, is not as rich as Texas A&M. So, got back to Houston, contacted Texas A&M, and said, "Can I come?" Because I was accepted. They said, "We don't have any dorms, but you're still accepted, and you're more than welcome to come." So I had to put together over a quick period of time a roommate and a living, but I did it. It was one of the few best decisions I made in my life. Obviously, marrying my wife was top of the list. But again, there's a few things in that story. Is I knew what I wanted. I had some principles. I had what was top of mind for me. And I took advantage of an opportunity or made a decision to go do something different because of that. I didn't predict that. I predicted I was going to go one way, and I ended up going another way. So the takeaway there is life is not predictable, but if you know what you want, you'll make some really good decisions. Really good decisions. And what I would encourage you is over the coming weeks and months and years to really refine what you want out of life. Because if you know what you want out of life, you'll get it. Again, it won't be a straight line, but you'll get it. And some of those things have come back, and I'll give you a few more stories in a minute about that, because that has been the common thread through my life. The second thing is to take risk. Life is not certain. It's to take risk. There's been a number of times that I've taken risks, and those risks have paid off, and other times they haven't paid off. But back to what I was trying to say before, life is not perfect. And those imperfections allow you to learn. And I always say, when you take a risk, there's two things that can come out. One is you'll succeed, or the second is you'll learn. You'll never fail, because it always says there's black and white. You'll learn. And I have learned a lot. In fact, I've learned more, and when the times did not go the way I thought of the decision I've made, I've learned a lot more. I'll give you a few examples of that. Early in my career, I was a CFO. I would just give you a quick background of my career and give you guys. I started out as a consultant at Arthur Andersen, which is today Accenture. And I found that the consulting background really allowed me to see a lot of different things in the business world. Allowed me to build my technical skills, allowed me to see different industries, it allowed me to meet different people. Now you can get that in many different venues, but that really worked for me. I ultimately ended up becoming the CFO, treasurer, and then CFO of some public companies, healthcare companies. One company I joined was in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The company, I took it public. It grew quite fast. It had a very, very dynamic and demanding CEO. At one point in time, he asked me we were going to miss earnings. First time the company in 3 years was going to miss earnings. And I had advised him early on that we were going to miss earnings, and he just did not want to hear it. And it got to a point that I had to make a decision. I had to make a decision that either I'm going to go along with him or I'm going to have to stand my grounds. And I stood my grounds, and ultimately the board came in and interjected into it, and the board agreed with me. We announced it. And at that time I said, is this a place I want to work? And is this a person I want to work for with this kind of an environment? And I walked in the day that the board agreed and we put out the announcement. I walked in and resigned. I told them I can stay on for the next 3 months or I'll walk out right now. But you have to give notice that I've resigned. And obviously, as CFO of a public company, you have to do that. But the circumstances was I didn't have, enough money to fill a coffee cup because I was young. I was only 31, early in my career. First CFO job. Second, my son was born about 2 weeks before that. But the point I'm trying to make is that there were some non-negotiables in my life, and that was one of them. I wasn't going to do something that was going to go against my principles. And I had to take a risk. The risk was, didn't have a job, had a 2-year-old, had to go find a job, had a wife that was just ballistic, but it was the right thing to do. Now, subsequently, I obviously got a job and everything worked out. But you have to have principles to make a decision, even if it's going to be uncomfortable. Now, there's a lot of great times that have come out that this has worked. Pick Humana. I knew whenever, after U.S. Oncology was sold to McKesson Corporation, I knew I wanted to do 2 things in healthcare. I didn't have a job. Seems to be a common theme here. Sorry about that. I knew I wanted to do two things in healthcare. I wanted to help people be healthier, and I wanted to try to make it simpler. Those were the two things that I saw as fundamental issues in healthcare. Is that healthcare is more focused on treating people as opposed to prevention and helping people. And Humana called me and said the CEO, Mike McAllister, was retiring. They asked me if I would consider the role. And as I learned about Humana, and specifically in their Medicare Advantage program, which I won't get into the details, it had the principles I was looking for. But it came back to risk. I had to make a decision. Humana's only had 2 CEOs in 50 years, both internally or developed. One was the founder. Another one was Mike McAllister. It's only 2 CEOs. The probability of a CEO being recruited outside into a company and the success of that is less than 30%. And I had never been in a payer insurance industry in my life. So it was a risk going there. 5 years later, it still seems to be working out. But the point I'm trying to make is I believed in something. I had principles. I was willing to take a risk, and I pursued it. Now, there's been times that hasn't worked out, but I've learned a lot during that period of time. And so I would encourage you as students to really focus on what you want. The last thing I'll say is, before I open it up to questions, where I have found to have the biggest impact in my career and my personal life is around helping others. And that sounds very, charity-oriented and very, aspirational. But let me try to put it in context and just I'll say where I got this from. When I was in Houston and got out of school, I felt a void in my life of education. And what it was I felt I had a very good technical support. Obviously, Mays College taught me well about accounting and finance and all the business curriculum. But I didn't know how to live life. I didn't know how to balance my priorities. I didn't know where and what to focus on. And so I listened to books on tape. And there was one book that I listened to, and it was by a guy by the name of Zig Ziglar. Has anyone heard about Zig Ziglar? He's since died. He's from Yazoo City, Mississippi. He's got this deep, deep Southern voice. And so it's catching. You listen to it, and he just keeps you just focused on the tape. I was listening to one day driving, and he said, if you help enough others get what they want, you will get all you want. And I've tried to take that principle and incorporate it in what I do on a day-to-day basis. And how does it show up in business? How does it show up in business for me? I have a belief that a successful business doesn't start with the shareholders. It starts with having a very effective organizational structure, happy employees, we call them associates, happy customers as a result of your happy employees, and then ultimately you have happy shareholders. But you can't have happy shareholders without having happy customers and without having happy employees. That formula doesn't work long term. It's a disaster long term. Short term it might work, but long term it doesn't. And so when I think about helping people, I think about how do I help our associates? What can I do to help them? So I am very active in going down and spending time on the phone. I want to understand what our associate is doing. So I'll sit side by side with our associate and watch them and answer phones with them. I'll go out with a nurse to one of our members' homes and sit with her and watch what's going on. I did this a number of months ago where I went to a home in North Miami, and it was with one of our members, and it was in an under-resourced area. And the individual was in her 80s. She was in a community that had a lot of crime. She had bars on her windows. And I sat there for about 30 minutes with the nurse. Nurse is, understanding her prescriptions, going around the house to make sure things are safe. She has a ramp and she has a shower support. And at the end, I asked her a question. I said, "What else could we do for you?" And she didn't know who I was. And she said, "I'm lonely." And she went on to say, "I haven't been out of the house in a week. I haven't seen my daughter or son in a month." And I tell you that story because today I know more about loneliness and the impact it has on health and the cost it brings to society than I would have ever known if I did not go on that visit. If I didn't have the mentality as I'm going to figure out how I can help our members at the front line. We've made a large investment in our customer relationship management system. And that whole reason, it was about $1 billion, the whole reason for that investment is because we had associates that were going to too many screens, and it was too hard of a job. And the only way I knew that was to go down and answer phone calls. And so when we think about helping others, you get all you want in life if you help enough people. It wraps around that concept. It wraps around if you put the person first that you're trying to help as opposed to yourself, it pays off in spades. One other thing I'll mention, and it relates to what to look for in your life. Find good sponsorship and mentors. I have found both when I need to make a decision that I consider to be big, in hindsight you look at it, it wasn't that big, but at the time it was big. Having somebody to reach out to and talk to that has your best interest in mind is very helpful. And during the years, I've found that has also been helpful in sponsoring. One of the things I've done in my career is I've done many different jobs. And I've been able to do that because I've had people that have sponsored me, have wanted to say, "Listen, let's put Bruce in this role so he can grow." And part of that is because they know that I'm not doing it for myself, that my ultimate goal is to improve, whether it's a customer, the business, or fellow colleagues. When you start thinking about yourself, less people are going to sponsor you. If you think about always helping others. One other thing is priorities. One of the things that I learned in my life, some hard lessons, was the fact that I didn't balance my life. And today I spend a lot of time trying to balance my life, a lot of effort. And so what's important to me is my health, my family, obviously my job, my friends, and spiritual. And so I am constantly figuring out how I spend my time related to that. Sometimes it's booked very deep. So every morning at 4:45, you'll see me running or being in the gym because health is really important to me. And the only way I can fit it in is early in the morning. You'll find that I am on the road a lot. But when it comes to my family, I always find a way to get and to spend time with them. Sometimes I'll schedule a trip and then I'll take the day off when I come into town. Or I'll schedule a time during the weekend that we'll go do something as a family. But being able to find what your priorities are and manage them is very important in your life. And as your life becomes more and more complex, it becomes more and more important. So, life is unpredictable. You got to know what you want. Being able to have balance in your life, know what the priorities are for you. Be able to help others. Over the years, that if I had to sort of sum all the decisions that I've made and where I've been, those would be probably the common elements of what's sort of gotten me to where I am and probably will get me where I'm going down the road. So with that, I'll open it up for questions. Yep.
Hi. So I was just wondering, you talked a lot about helping others while you were working at Humana.
Mm-hmm.
How did you help others in your previous jobs to earn those sponsorships that got you the call of that Humana, or that got Humana to call you
Sure.
and ask you to become CEO?
Sure. I'll repeat the question because I know there's some. The question was at Humana. I've given examples of how I've helped others, and how did I do that in other roles and responsibilities in my career. And maybe it's a little bit of a mindset. First, let me just say that the mindset is I am not motivated directly, but indirectly to advance myself. I am motivated to advance the team. I'm motivated to advance the business, motivated to advance the customer. And if you start with that mindset, it is always the right context. And so at Price Waterhouse, I worked on many teams. And it was about the success of the team that was more important than the success of me. And so in a project that we're working together, it was never I did, it's we did. It's when if someone had an event to go to, I would work extra hours so that they could go to the event. Now they would do the same thing for me. But I found that kind of motivation is much stronger than the motivation of it's about me. Now the corollary to that, or the adding to that, is I've also always tried to find, especially in my latter years of my career, is how do I match a business purpose to an aspirational goal? And at Humana, we have our enterprise goal of improving the communities we serve by 20% by 2020 through making it easier for people to achieve their best health. And that goal is why we have engagement scores of greater than 90% in our company. Because it's more than about making earnings per share of this amount this quarter. It's more about how are we impacting the people that we touch on a day-to-day basis. And to me, if you can find that connection between a business model and a higher purpose, it's a stronger motivator, it's a reason to come to work, and in addition, it's good business. U.S. Oncology, it was the same way. It was around cancer patients. How do we create a model that cancer patients are able to get all services in a local setting? Yeah. Other questions? Yes? Oh, no, right here. We got one. Sorry. You go ahead. You got the mic.
I have a question. Does Humana fear the advancement of technology to where patients go in, put on a bracelet, and it tells everything? And do you fear the loss of a person-to-person relationship?
Yeah. So is technology going to replace the care and human side? No, I don't think so. In fact, I wrote a blog on LinkedIn about this a while back. I believe technology will enable more personalization, but will never replace the person. And the reason why I believe that is I think through data analytics, through more proactive data being collected on the individual, whether it's a bracelet or some other technology, that you're going to be able to refine more and more of how you can help that person. But at the end of the day, people are motivated by other humans. They're not motivated by technology. In fact, we had a conversation this morning with some of the faculty here about technology. And what we are finding in our research that peer-to-peer influence is much more effective on helping people engage with their health than technology. Where people have walked that path before, or there's a trust in a sort of an environment that they are part of, is much more influential than even a doctor or a nurse, where people of like minds are able to influence each other. And so I think healthcare I'm excited about the ability to use healthcare and technology to personalize it, but not to replace the person. Yeah.
So I have a very specific question. It's kind of broad. I want to give that preface. And I wrote it down because it's sort of broad. So you've had significant experience in the field, and you've talked sort of implicitly about the importance of strong organizational culture. And so in your experience, what are the most salient tenets or soft skills associated with organizational culture, and how do you perpetuate that in your environment?
Sure, that's good. One is around purpose. And that sounds really soft, especially for some of the finance and accounting people in here. They're going to say purpose. Oh my gosh, where's the debits and credits, or what's the net present value, or a cap model, or something like that. Let me go off on a tangent here for a second, because as I grew in my career, I really valued the technical capabilities of individuals. I really valued when we were negotiating a deal, and the lawyer on the other side and their knowledge of the M&A law and the contractual side, or doing a bond document, the technical side from a FASB or something like that, and investment bankers, and I really valued that brain power. As I progressed, I became more and more enamored, in awe of people that can influence people. The influencing skills are so important. We have 57,000 associates in our company. There's no way I can know and give them direction every day. So something they have to get from their own. And how we do that is through values. We have 5 values that are really important, and they're constantly being reminded about those values. And frankly, I've had to fire people when they do not follow the values. Because if I don't, it doesn't mean I'm committed to those values. And that aspirational goal, the enterprise goal that I mentioned, drives a clarity of what we're in this, why we're all collected together. And those 2 things are very important in setting culture. Now, the tone at the top, how I walk, talk, and behave, is very important. We had a conversation this morning about if I took a shortcut and did something that was it wasn't wrong, but it was sort of gray, that sets the wrong tone. Even here at the university, everyone's saying howdy and being respectful. That sets the tone, and it reinforces the values. And to me, that is one of the most important things. It's setting it and then developing an environment that follows behind it. So for us, customers are a really important thing. I find if we don't know the customer, we can't make good decisions. So every month on Monday, we have the voice of the customer for 3 hours. And we have people bringing in tapes of bad phone calls or videos of something, or we'll bring a few customers in on a panel. Because being able to have that connectivity makes your decisions stronger, and that line of sight. Yeah. Good. Other question? She has one there, and I know she's been trying a few times, but yep. Good.
Very grateful for your time. Thank you. My question is, how do you manage design or contrarian point of view?
Okay, good. One of the things that I have found over my transition in the career is the management styles have changed. When I started, and especially in consulting and public accounting, it was command and control. It was top down, go do this, I'm the expert, then come back and tell me how I did it, and then I'll give you the next command. And frankly, there's a generational difference, and I know some of the colleagues at my age have troubles working with the generation that's coming out of school. What I have found is diversity of thought. Not just diversity of gender and origin and items like that, but diversity of thought, of experience makes better decisions. And so we call it healthy tensions in our organization. And it is fascinating to see because I will have, in our meetings, I try to find every constituent being represented around the table when we're making a strategic decision or an investment decision. So I have our human resource person there representing our associates. I have our customer, we have on our executive team, we have our senior VP of customer. We'll have the CFO. We'll have our segment leaders in there. And I'm looking for that diversity of thought. I'm looking for that healthy tension and that conflict. But you come out of that stronger. You come out of it stronger because the decision is richer and the decision is more thoughtful and people learn. My CFO today is a much better person. This is an individual that graduated from Harvard, graduated from Stanford, is a Goldman banker, and he is much better today than he was 2 years ago when he came in the organization as a result of our Chief Consumer Officer. He has a much better feeling of what digital does and the ease of experience. He has a much better understanding of when we make investments in CRM, that's $1 billion, and the impact it has. But if you were to do that on an ROI basis for 1 year, you would have never made that decision in your life. But the construct of a diversity of thought is very important. What's important for you to take away is how do you create that? How do you create the environment that motivates people to have that constructive thought and to have that debate that's constructive and to pull the best out of people to be able to have that side. And that's what leadership's about. It's about getting the best out of people, motivating them, giving them a reason, getting where their skills are and support them where their weaknesses are. Right? Yes, I know she's been trying really hard. Yeah.
Hi, I was just wondering, what would you say is the greatest advantage of working on the business side of the healthcare industry, and what's the greatest disadvantage?
The greatest advantage, for me, it's easy to get motivated. There's a reason beyond the earnings per share and all the business side of that. So there's a motivational piece under that, and different businesses have different motivation. The closer you get to patient care, the more motivating it is. As you move farther away and you're in the distribution supply chain and things like that, it becomes more business oriented, but the closer you get to the care model. A few things in healthcare that is unique. One is that it moves at glacier speed. It is slow as hell. And it is because there's just inherent regulation, there's inherent bias, and the ability for adoption. It's a conservative industry. And so it moves slow. Now I think it's moving faster now because of the cost curve and the impact it's having on society and our productivity, and we got to do something or it's going to really hurt this country. And so I think there's motivation more to make a change, but it moves slow as can be. The second challenge, the third point I want to make is, in healthcare, it's a three-way. There's many different dimensions. You got the payer, you got the provider, you got the patient, and then in addition, on top of that, you got government regulation. And in no industry in the world that the person that is getting the service is not paying the bill. And that is just different. If you go down the street and you want to go and buy an electronic, you're paying the bill and you're going through your mind, is this worth the price I'm paying? Consumer Report will evaluate it, and you can be intellectually educated on it. In healthcare, transparency is lacking. In addition, the person isn't paying most of the bill. And the person that's recommending has a high motivation to do as much volume as they can today. So the complexity of the business model makes it difficult. Yeah.
We have time for one more question.
Okay.
Hello, sir.
It's on.
So with regards to the merger, so it's been projected to be completed by end of the year. And given the implications for you, how do you approach this with that open mind and that bias? And then do you plan to be involved afterwards when it's complete?
Okay, there's some interesting questions. Let me first talk about the merger, and I can talk about my circumstances. Well, I'll talk about three things. I'll talk about the environment we operate in, talk about the merger, and then talk about less about my personal circumstances. We operate today in an environment that is very uncertain. I got 50,000 people that don't know if the merger is going to go through or not. We've been dealing with this for 15 months now, 14 months. We are in a lawsuit with the Justice Department. I don't know if it's going to go through. The Justice Department, in its own right, has probably taken the position that big business in healthcare is not the right thing to do. We can go through all the kind of philosophy around that, but that's the perspective. So I don't know if this deal is going to get done or not, which brings an interesting perspective of, do I need to have a plan B? Which we're working on, and yes, we need to have that. That would be just not the right, you need to plan for that. It brings uncertainty to our 50,000 people. And now we've done some things to shore that up, and actually our turnover is at the same level it was prior to the merger. Part of it is because of the environment we're in, part of the agreement that we've made with Aetna that Humana is going to be the governmental side of Aetna. And so it gives certainty, and we have a lot of unique capabilities that Aetna doesn't have in that. But one of the things that the executive team did, I guess it was about a year ago. It was in February of last year. And what we did, we had a little retreat, and we said, how do we deal with this environment for each one of us? Because most of the time the executive team is trashed. They're gone, and the acquiring organization takes over. We committed that, and this gets back to serving others, we committed that the best thing we can do is to have a company that is successful, and if the deal goes through, is delivered to Aetna in the best way possible. And the second thing we need to do is to ensure that our 50,000 associates are well taken care of and are in position for the transition. It's not about us. We'll be taken care of in one way or fashion. It's about that. And with that, those two things, the clarity of thought and purpose and what you need to focus on becomes simple. It becomes focus on the customer, focus on the associate, make sure we're doing everything to drive this business. Let's not worry about us. And that has, if you were to ask any of the executive team and say, what one thing did you do over the last 12 months that made it easier for you to deal with this uncertain environment? It was that.